This is the Seth Mila Program.
As I was walking into a coffee shop for a meeting with one person, I had on my mind somebody else that after that meeting I really needed to contact in order to resolve a problem that was going on. And as I walked in the door, who should be sitting there but that second person that I said I needed to talk to, I need to get in touch with after the first meeting. You ever had that happen? Kind of a weird little coincidence? You think about somebody you haven't spoken to in years and then pretty soon your phone rings and it's them? Or you meet a complete stranger only to discover that quick conversation had a significant impact. You can't really help but wonder, what are the chances of that? Most of us call those circumstances coincidences. But today, I'd kind of like to explore, are they? Or is there something more going on than we realize? Coincidences really are some funny things most of the time. We don't pay a lot of attention most of the time. You know, they're simply interesting little moments that make us smile before we go on with our day. But every now and then, something happens that seems a little too perfect. You know what I mean? A conversation comes at exactly that right moment. A missed opportunity actually turns out to be a blessing. A chance meeting changes the direction of someone's life. Was that completely by chance? Or was there something more going on? People have been asking questions like that since the beginning of time, I guess. Some believe everything in life is random. Others believe every detail of our lives has been planned from the very beginning. And I think probably most of us live somewhere in the middle. I kind of do. I think we have free will to make our own choices and mistakes, but I also think maybe there's the grand plan that if we pay attention to it, things go better for us. So today, I thought we would simply explore some remarkable stories, look at a few fascinating facts, if you don't mind, and share a couple of personal stories that I have on my mind, and invite you to decide for yourself. You may not look at the word coincidence quite the same way again. Let me ask, have you ever spent hours looking for something only to just accidentally bump into it? And you're like, I know I looked here before. I'm sure I looked here before, but, well, there it is. The actor Anthony Hopkins knows that feeling. In the early 1970s, Hopkins had been cast in a film based on a novel called The Girl from Petrovka, and he wanted to read the book before filming began. Not a bad idea. There was just one little problem. He couldn't find a copy of this book anywhere. He searched bookstores all across London and had no luck. The novel had become surprisingly difficult to find. A few days later, while riding the Underground home, Anthony noticed a book lying on a station bench. No one was around, so he picked it up, kind of curious. It was The Girl from Petrovka. Not only had he found the exact book he had been searching for, but something a little more happened a few months later. He met the author, George Pfeiffer. When Hopkins mentioned the incredible coincidence, Pfeiffer looked stunned. During their conversation, Pfeiffer explained that he had loaned his own annotated copy to a friend who had accidentally lost it. When Hopkins handed him the book, the author immediately recognized his handwritten notes in the margins. It was his copy. Now, how do you explain that? Was that simply an extraordinary series of random events? Or was it something more? I don't know. But I do know this. Sometimes life presents us with moments that leave us kind of scratching our heads and wondering if there's more going on than what we can see. And that's exactly the question we're exploring today. And at this point, you may be thinking to yourself, now hold on. Aren't coincidences just statistics? Actually, sometimes they are. Think about this. Every day, billions of people make phone calls. They send text messages, they travel, meet strangers, change their plans. Or think of somebody they haven't thought of in years. With that many things happening every single day, remarkable coincidences are almost guaranteed to occur. Mathematicians even have a name for this idea. It's called the law of truly large numbers. That almost sounds like a Monty Python skit. But anyway, the law of truly large numbers. And what that means is, in simple terms, if enough opportunities exist, even incredibly unlikely events become surprisingly likely. Sometimes a coincidence really is just a coincidence. And I think that's important to focus on, right? Not everything has this mysterious meaning behind it. Sometimes it's just what happens. Because if we label every unusual event as something miraculous, we stop thinking carefully. And those things that are actually miraculous, they lose their effectiveness. We lose our ability to recognize them. Here's where things become really interesting. Every once in a while, a coincidence isn't remarkable because it's merely unlikely. It's remarkable because of what it accomplishes. A chance meeting changes someone's future. A delayed flight saves a life. A conversation answers a question no one knew you were asking. Those are the moments that kind of make us pause. Not because we can really prove anything by it, but because they seem to carry meaning. Maybe that's why we remember them for years to come, while we quickly forget the thousands of ordinary coincidences that meant nothing at all. And that raises another question, I guess. Could there be times when what appears to be coincidence is actually something far more personal? So if you don't mind, let me share with you a story of my own, something that happened to me that you could dismiss as a coincidence, but in my heart, I really knew it was something much more personal and meaningful. When I was in high school, I rode a motorcycle to school just about every day when the weather was nice. One afternoon, I was heading home, trying to beat one of those, the typical Florida afternoon thunderstorms. You know what I'm talking about? The wind suddenly picks up, the sky gets really dark, and you can feel the temperature drop. That's usually when you know, hey, this is not just a quick shower. This is kind of an important, maybe a serious storm coming through. So I was trying to hustle home. As I was rounding a curve, heading to the house, this big gust of wind came up, and it broke a branch from a large oak tree off, and it fell literally as I was riding through. The branch kind of had a Y to it from the thing, and I fell right in between the branches, and it knocked me right off my motorcycle. I wasn't really hurt, but there wasn't really any time to respond to it. Just, I think the tree branch just kind of picked me up and scooped me off onto the pavement while my bike went toward the curb. I wasn't hurt. I had a few scratches, a couple bruises in some places. You know what I'm saying? But as I picked myself up, I kind of realized, okay, nothing's broken. I'm okay. I was more worried about my motorcycle. It's like, great, this thing's probably severely damaged. So I'm trying to untangle my bike from the branches and thinking, if it'll fire back up, or if it's good, I'm going to ride home. I got to get out of here. And just as I was struggling with it, who pulls up but my mom? And I'm like, what are you doing here? She said that even though I hadn't called her, no one had called her, right? We didn't have cell phones back in my day. We didn't have the cell phone, so nobody called. I didn't know anybody in this neighborhood, so I doubt very seriously if they would have called and said, hey, Margaret, your kid just dropped his bike. No. She said that she was at work when all of a sudden she had this overwhelming feeling that I was in trouble. She said she couldn't explain it. She just got in her car and started driving. She had no idea where I was. She had no idea where to go. She just followed her feeling. And somehow she drove right to the place where I was at trying to get my motorcycle untangled. Now, can I easily and quickly explain that? It's like, oh, yeah, sure, that's a coincidence. To me, that seemed a bit more intense than just a random coincidence. Maybe there's a perfectly good and reasonable explanation for it, but I really think it was something else. And the reason I say that I feel that it was something else is that I looked back on it, and honestly, not to be overdramatic, but the branch that I went in between, either one of them, had they hit me in the head, probably have killed me. And if I'm perfectly honest, it's not the first time I'd had a little oopsie with my motorcycle. You know, I'd dropped it a couple times, and wet pavement, you slip and fall and that kind of stuff. And, you know, when that happened, did my mom show up at those? No. But this one had a little more, I don't know, significance to it. This one, there was something about this incident that alerted my mom, her mom intuition, whatever. And she knew exactly where to go and when. Everything was fine. You know, my bike had a little bit of damage. I dusted myself off. I rode home. Of course, Mom decided she's going to ride right behind me to make sure everything was okay, which is great for a high school student, having his mom ride right behind him. Anyway, that's another story. But after she was convinced I was okay, off she went back to work. I've never forgotten it. You know, it still stays with me. And everyone, you know, I wondered how many moments in our lives just cannot be measured by probability alone. Let me share another story that I guess you could say was a coincidence, but I don't think so. And if you'll allow me, it's another personal experience. This one didn't involve a motorcycle. It's not really all that dramatic. It was a much quieter situation. It was very recent, but it left a deeper impression on me. I guess like a lot of people, I've gone through periods of discouragement where I was just feeling kind of down. And there was one particular time recently when I found myself just kind of questioning whether I was really making a difference, right? Was I doing what God wanted me to do? Or did I get in the way and I missed the mark a little bit? Was I worthy? I'm not worthy. Anyway, did my work really matter? I think we've all had those questions run through our heads. But you know, these were private thoughts. This is something that I had a conversation with God, just he and I, right? Just me pouring my heart out, letting God know what was on my heart. I hadn't discussed it with anyone. Well, later that day, there was a staff meeting with the ministry that I work for. And because we're all scattered all over the country, like a lot of people, we meet on a video conference, Teams, actually. And as we do in most of our conferences, most of our meetings and so forth, we open up with prayer and we ask, hey, you know, does anybody have anything that they would like to pray about? I didn't say anything about how I was feeling. I just didn't want to go, excuse me, I'd like to mention in this meeting where there's like 50 other people, I'm feeling kind of down today. I could have, right? It's the environment where it's very safe to do it. I just didn't want to, right? It's like, I'll listen, pray for other people, but my thing, I'm just going to keep to myself. Well, as we started the meeting, a couple people prayed for the health of loved ones and, guidance for this, that, and the other thing. One person began praying and said that they would like to pray especially for me. And I hadn't said anything. As they prayed, they said that they were asking that I would know that I was worthy, that I would know I was exactly where God wanted me to be. They prayed that I would understand that my work mattered and that I wouldn't become discouraged. I'll be honest with you, I just sat there and listened. And every one of those words answered the very questions that I had been asking earlier in the day. Remember, these are questions I had not spoken out loud. No one in that room knew the conversations that I had been having with God earlier in the day. They didn't know what was on my heart. I don't think my facial expressions are that, obvious. And for me, that was what was remarkable. It wasn't that, someone simply prayed an encouraging prayer. It was that they prayed for those specific things for me at the exact time I needed to hear them. When the meeting was over, as everything was kind of finishing up, it brought joy to my heart. It was one of those things that it just, I don't know, it was my interpretation of this quote unquote coincidence, right, is that this was God saying, hey man, I heard you and I've got you. And as a sign that I have you, I'm going to lay you on someone else's heart so that they pray about the things that you were worried about so that I have you. I heard you. And it worked. I felt something that, joy that I hadn't had during this rough time. I felt seen. I felt heard. And perhaps more importantly, I felt that God cared enough about me, little old me, to answer those silent questions that I'd been, carrying around. Now, can this be scientifically explained and proven? No. God doesn't participate in scientific experiments. It's like, no, hey guys, it's this thing called faith. Either you do it by faith or you don't. Now, I understand someone listening right now might see this circumstance completely differently, and it's okay. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm simply explaining to you what happened as we have this conversation about coincidences. The experience did not change the way I look at prayer. It did not change the way I think about God's care for people, for everyone. It strengthened what I already knew. God hears the big and the little prayers, even the ones you kind of say under your breath. If you don't mind, let me share one more silly coincidence / prayer story, right? Okay. We had a wonderful little pup named Ellie, a beagle mix. In other words, couch potato. And because at this particular time that I'm getting ready to share, I was doing morning radio. It meant I got up at 30, and it was my job to take Ellie out for her morning walk every morning. And what was really funny is that when the weather was great, not a cloud in the sky, and it wasn't freezing cold, Ellie would go out, take care of business, and then scoot back in the house just as happy as could be. But it seemed like every time, if it was raining or snowing or it was just bitterly cold outside, that's when Ellie decided, I need to take my time. I just need to sniff, and I need to walk forever, and nope, this is not the right place, and that's not it, and it would just drive me crazy. It's like, dog, please, I got to get to work. It's miserable out here. Can you please just do what you got to do and let me get on with the day? Ellie never really cooperated with me. Anyway, on this one particular morning, it was that really cold drizzle, not quite freezing, but just enough to make you cold and wet, which is my favorite. Love being cold and wet. Anyway, it was drizzling, and as I noticed it as I'm getting the pup ready, right? And a little prayer under my breath. It wasn't like, dear God, please hear me. It was just like talking to myself, but it was a prayer. And I was like, can you please just make it stop raining long enough for me to walk the dog and get in my car and head off to work? And I'll be honest with you, I didn't expect it to happen. But as I put the leash on the dog, we stepped down the front steps, it stopped raining. And I'm like, oh, wow. Okay. Now, because I had responsibility, I had to take care of the dog. I didn't pay that much attention to it, right? walked the dog, and as usual, she took her time. As we were walking back up the steps into the house, once she had finally taken care of business, it really started raining again. And that's when it hit me. I asked God if he would please have it stop raining so I could walk the dog. And that is exactly what happened. Okay, so let me clarify. I am not saying that I'm tight with God enough I can say, hey, man, can you just make it stop raining so it's convenient for me? No, not at all. I think it was just one of those circumstances. Once again, a little, you could call it a coincidence, but it was one of those moments where God simply said to me, I got you. I got you. I hear you. I am right here. You can trust me with the little things. You can also trust me with the big things. All right, let's move on. Now, before I share this next story, I probably need to give a little, public service announcement, maybe a little warning. The story isn't scary, but it is a bit gruesome. So if you're eating, maybe put that down until after you've listened to this, okay? All right, here we go. Now, I didn't warn you. We're going to travel back to the year 1838. Author Edgar Allan Poe published a novel called The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. In one part of this story, a ship sinks, leaving 4 men stranded at sea. After days without food, they face an impossible decision. To survive, they kill and eat the youngest member of their crew. His name in the novel? Richard Parker. I told you, it's a little gruesome. It's a disturbing story, but remember, A, it's completely fictional, and B, who's the author? That's right, Edgar Allan Poe. Now, while it is a complete work of fiction, 46 years later, in 1884, a real yacht named the Mignonette sank in the South Atlantic Ocean. 4 survivors escaped in a small lifeboat. Days passed, then weeks, no food, and no rescue in sight. They faced the same terrible decision that Edgar Allan Poe had imagined decades earlier. The youngest member of the crew was killed so that the others could survive. His name? Richard Parker. Now, the similarities shocked people at the time, not because the shipwrecks happened. Yeah, unfortunately, shipwrecks happened. And it wasn't really that the desperate sailors had resorted to cannibalism before. History records other examples. It was the name, the same name, in an almost identical situation. 46 years after Edgar Allan Poe written it into his novel, the exact same thing happened. Now, can that be easily explained? Yeah, maybe. There are those that point out that the name Richard Parker was fairly common as an English name in the 19th century. Perhaps it was nothing more than an extraordinary coincidence. Perhaps. But whether you believe it was chance, fate, or something we simply can't explain, it's one of those stories that make you stop and ask, what are the odds? Now, after that, why don't we look at something a bit lighter? And it's not going to ruin your lunch. It's about baseball, unless you hate baseball. Trust me, if Hollywood had written this story, a lot of people would have said, this is too unrealistic. There's no way. So a few years ago, people in professional baseball started noticing something kind of strange. There were 2 pitchers. Both were named Brady Fiegel. And here's where it gets really interesting. Neither one knew the other existed. Yet, both were professional baseball pitchers. Both stood 6'4". Both had bright red hair with kind of a thick reddish beard. Both wore thick, black-rimmed glasses. Both pitched in the minor leagues. And believe it or not, they had both had elbow surgery called Tommy John surgery on their elbow. That surgery had been performed by the very same surgeon. And at one point, the surgeon's office actually confused one Brady Fiegel for the other. Eventually, the story became so unbelievable and talked about that a TV program arranged for the two men to meet. And, by then, everyone had the same question. Were they long-lost twins, brothers, maybe cousins? Surely they had to be related somehow. They took a DNA test. The results came back not related, not even close. Just two men with the same unusual name, same profession, same height, same hair, same beard, same glasses, and even the same surgery. One of the Bradys joked afterwards, I guess we're still brothers in some way. Can you explain that? Maybe, after all, there's billions of people in the world. I guess, statistically speaking, some incredibly unlikely things are bound to happen. But I still have to, kind of smile every time I hear this story, because every once in a while, life seems to, I guess, have a sense of humor. And I think this is just another example of where you hear this and go, what are the odds of that? I'd like to end our segment here about coincidences with, if you don't mind, another personal story. This one involves my wife and I. And as she's listening to this episode, this is the first time she knew that I was bringing this up. Should I have talked to her about it before I did it? Yeah, but the nature of it is about how she and I, over the years, have come to understand that when there's a big decision, that the best thing for us to do is pray about the issue separately, and after a period of time, see if the guidance that God gives each of us separately agrees. And we've done this over the years about some very important decisions. I mean, first of all, we did this when she and I were dating, and we knew, hey, I kind of like you. I'd like to get married. Marriage is a huge responsibility and a big decision. And we knew that for each of us, it was a decision that should not be taken lightly. So we decided that for about 3 days, we would not have any contact with each other, that we would not text, we wouldn't call, we wouldn't email, we would not see each other for about 3 days. And during that 3-day period, we prayed and fasted and asked that God guide us in whether or not we should pursue getting married, or if we were not the right person for each other, to move on. And one of the great things was after 3 days of praying and fasting, for me, it was an interesting, I guess you could call it coincidence. I had just finished praying at the end of this 3-day prayer and fast time. I had just finished praying, and I got the answer, right? I felt very confident on my heart. My phone rang, and it was her saying that she had just finished her prayer and fasting time, and that she had an answer on her heart, and perhaps it was time for us to get together and have a conversation. Well, as you can imagine, that conversation was yes on both of our hearts because, 26 plus years later, we're married. So we've done this in serious circumstances. Should we get married? Should we have a child? Should we make significant financial commitments? And like most couples, we've had moments where there wasn't an obvious answer. But most of the time, when we separate and pray separately, sometimes for days, and then we both get together and talk about what's on our heart, it almost inevitably is that God puts the same answer on each of our hearts. It's how we confirm with each other that A, we're going in the right path, but B, that God is in it. The first time that happened, it was, kind of like, wow. And there's still a wow factor to it. But this has given us the ability to trust God, which has been an incredibly valuable thing, not only in our marriage, but our separate lives. There's been numerous occasions where we've prayed about something and God's guidance has turned out to be the right thing to do. I could probably spend another hour just going through those circumstances, but you get the point. You understand what I'm saying. I suppose someone could argue that us coming to the same conclusions at the same time might be because, A, we've been married for a long time and we know each other very well. And I can understand why you might say that. Like I mentioned, we truly believe that when we sincerely seek God's direction, He's faithful to give it. And when He gives the same answer to both of us independently, we don't see it as a coincidence. We see it as confirmation. Again, like I mentioned earlier, it's not because we think we're special. Ooh, we have a special communication with God. No, we don't. We don't have any communication with God that you don't have. It's just a case that God has proven Himself faithful to us time and time and time again. Has every prayer been answered immediately? No. Have we always understood His timing? Absolutely not. But when we've genuinely sought His wisdom together, He has never failed us. And after experiencing that over and over again, it becomes pretty difficult to dismiss it as chance, at least for us. It's become more of a way we've learned that God is still in the lead, and He leads the people who sincerely seek Him. And for us personally, we see that as the key to a successful life.
And now it's time for
5 random
facts.
If you happen to find yourself in that social setting where the conversation comes to an abrupt halt, and you find yourself in need of a topic to get the conversation started again, allow me to provide you with a few options. In 1940, identical twin brothers Jim Lewis and Jim Springer were separated shortly after birth and adopted by different families in Ohio. Neither family knew the other existed. By pure coincidence, both adoptive families named their son James. But that's only the beginning. Both Jims grew up to become sheriff's deputies. Both enjoyed woodworking. Both suffered from migraine headaches. Both married women named Linda. Then both divorced their Linda and remarried women named Betty. Each had a son named James Allen, although one spelled it A-L-A-N and the other spelled it A-L-L-A-N. Anyway, both even owned a dog named Toy. When the twins were reunited at age 39, researchers from the University of Minnesota studied them as part of a landmark twins study. And then there's Wilmer McLean. He may have had the worst luck in Civil War history. During the First Battle of Bull Run in 1861, an artillery shell struck his Virginia home, and he said to the family, "You know what? Maybe we should move." He moved his family 120 miles away to escape the war. 4 years later, Union General Ulysses S. Grant and Confederate General Robert E. Lee chose his new living room in Appomattox as the site of Lee's surrender, effectively ending the Civil War. As the saying goes, the Civil War began in Wilmer McLean's front yard and ended in his front parlor. Violet Jessup worked as a stewardess aboard all three of the White Star Line's sister ships, the RMS Olympic, the RMS Titanic, and the HMHS Britannic. She survived the Olympic's collision with another ship in 1911, escaped the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, and lived through the Britannic striking a mine and sinking in 1916. She even survived being pulled beneath the ship's propellers before escaping. Remarkably, after surviving all 3 disasters, she continued her career at sea for decades. Would I have done? No. I've been like, after the first one, I think I'm going to find a job on land. Anyway, in 1932, Australia actually went to war with emus. Yes, emus. After thousands of the large flightless birds invaded farmland in Western Australia, the government sent soldiers armed with machine guns to drive them away. And actually, the emus proved to be surprisingly difficult to defeat, scattering into small groups, outrunning the soldiers, and making very poor targets. After firing thousands of rounds with very little success, the military withdrew, and the birds were declared the unlikely winners. And lastly, in mid-1930s, Detroit factory worker Joseph Figlock was walking down the street when a toddler fell from a second-story window. The child landed on Figlock, breaking his fall. Both survived with only minor injuries. About a year later, Figlock was walking down the same street when the same child fell from the same window again and once again landed on him. Both survived a second time.
This has been today's edition of
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Random facts.
Hi, this is Christopher Walken, and you're listening to a guy that I served in Vietnam with, Seth Mila. Seth was one of the craziest guys in our troupe. He used to always do jokes with pigeons. Anyways, pow!
All right, so wrapping up, I've shared a lot of personal stuff today. I hope you don't mind. We've kind of traveled through some remarkable stories. A book somehow found its exact person at the time it was needed. A reminder that statistics can explain more than we sometimes realize. We talked about a frightened teenage boy lying beside a motorcycle while his mom, without knowing why, suddenly felt she needed to find him. A prayer that was answered before it was ever spoken out loud. A fictional story that seemed to come true decades later. And the story of the baseball players is still one that I find amazing. Maybe you were listening today and concluded that every one of those stories can be explained. And if so, okay, I respect that. Maybe you've had experiences of your own, moments that you still can't quite explain. You know, that unexpected phone call, the conversation that came at exactly the right time, the opportunity that seemed to appear out of nowhere. And, you may have dismissed those moments as coincidence, or perhaps they've left you wondering if something was quietly working in the background all along. Now, obviously can't answer that question for you. But I can tell you this, the longer that I have lived, the more convinced I've become that God is far more involved in our lives than we often recognize. And in my experience, again, God doesn't shout. He whispers. And sometimes it drives me absolutely crazy. It's like, can you please just yell at me or give me this giant neon sign so I know which way to go? No. He's very quiet in the back of my head. Sometimes God speaks to us through circumstances and through people around us. And sometimes just directly through answered prayer. You pray about something and it happens. And sometimes through what the world simply calls coincidence. So the next time something really interesting happens that makes you stop and go, what are the odds of that happening? Maybe ask one more question. What if it's more than that? I have really enjoyed our time together talking about coincidences, and as you can imagine, I very much look forward to the next time that we get together. Take care. If you have questions or comments regarding today's show, or perhaps you'd like to suggest a topic for us to explore in a future program, please email me at sethmilamedia@gmail.com. That's Seth, milamedia@gmail.com. This program was sponsored in part by Audio Imaging Solutions, LLC. Your message professionally crafted and delivered. For professional voice work, go to audioimigingsolutions.com. That's audioimigingsolutions.com.